Hello friends, and welcome to another blind date with a book and a blind date with a bake video. It's the end of April. It's actually April 28th, and I just finished this book this morning. And it is the thinnest book ever, but it took me forever to finish because there's some reasons, but that's okay. So we have the book finished, thankfully. We also made the cake today, thankfully. So we have both the cake and book. We've done it. We've done another month, which I'm really, really proud of. So before we get too far, let's go ahead and have a little recap of what we're doing here. Why we have a bake and why we have a book. What are we baking? Whoop. That's what we're baking. And I think I want to choose one of these ones. The question is which one? They're both the same size, almost the same thickness. I think I'm going to go with this one. It's a little bit thinner, and I'm feeling a little bit of a thinner book this month. I have no idea. Ready? Oh. Thomas Hardy, Under the Greenwood Tree. Ooh. So as you saw, I was supposed to read Tom Hardy's Under the Greenwood Tree, and I had no idea what this book was going to be about. I had no idea anything about this book, and I have found out that I actually bought this book. I bought this book randomly about 6 months ago in a random little tiny bookshop, Abby's bookshop, I believe. I'll put the name here. It's a really famous bookshop, and it was at the very front, and I pulled it out, and I just thought the cover looked really pretty, which it does. And that's why I bought it. And I didn't know anything about Tom Hardy. I didn't know anything about this book, and I bought it. And I'm kind of thankful I did because, one, Tom Hardy's a classic, and two, I needed to read a Victorian novel for my book bingo, and three, there were actually parts of this book I liked. But before we get too far into this, I first want to do a little baking montage of this beautiful cake because we have a cake here that is done. And so I want to do a little beautiful montage of the cake, and I'm going to tell you the synopsis, or like what the back would say. Not this back, because this back doesn't say anything, but what the book's kind of about. And then afterwards we're going to have a piece of cake, and then we're going to and then we're going to jump into non-spoiler reviews, which won't be very long because this book is short and it's a Victorian novel. So if you know, Victorian novels sometimes don't have as deep as a plot as some other books. And then we'll do spoilers. So that's kind of the game we're playing today. And I'm really excited for this cake because all I can smell is chocolate. So let's go ahead and do a baking montage. I'll tell you the book synopsis, and then we'll try the cake, and then we'll do my other things. Got it. Cool. Under the Greenwood Tree is a story of the romantic entanglement between church musician Dick Dewey and the attractive new school mistress, Fancy Day. A pleasant romantic tale set in Victorian era, Under the Greenwood Tree is one of Thomas Hardy's most gentle and pastoral novels. It was originally written in 1872, and I'm going to read a few quotes because this montage is going to be a little bit longer than this summary. To dwellers in a wood, almost every species of tree has its voice as well as its feature. At the passing of a breeze, the fir trees sob and moan no less distinctly than the rock. The holly whistles as it battles with itself. The ash hisses amid its quiverings. The beech rustles while its flat boughs rise and fall. And winter much modifies the note of such trees as shed their leaves, does not destroy its individuality. The last day of the story is dated just subsequent to the development of the seasons when country people go to bed among nearly naked trees, are lulled to sleep by the fall of rain, and awake next morning among green ones, when the landscape appears embarrassed with a sudden weight and brilliance of its leaves, when the night-jar comes and strikes up for the summer his tune of one note, when the apple trees have bloomed, and the roads and orchard grass become spotted with fallen petals, when the faces of the delicate flowers are darkened and their heads weighed down by a throng of honeybees, which increase their humming till humming is too mild a term for all-pervading sound, and when cuckoos, blackbirds, and sparrows have their hitherto been merry and respectful neighbors become noisy and persistent intimates. So, I think you can kind of get from the gist of those little quotes in the synopsis that This book is a Victorian novel. It is definitely a Victorian novel. But before we get too far in, I want to try the cake because for those of you who don't want to watch the spoiler section and want to read this book, I always forget to try the cake. So I'm going to eat the cake real quick to tell you how amazing it is. I first want to say about the cake, it actually smelled so much like egg when I was cooking it, and I'm not surprised. I mean, there's a bunch of egg in here. I'm sorry, but look how satisfying that was. Like, so there's 5 eggs in this cake, so there's quite a bit of egg, and we end up splitting it between the egg whites and the egg yolks, so we fluff up both so it actually gets quite airy. This is so fluffy and spongy. It's quite nice looking. But I was worried that it might taste really eggy because all I could smell was eggs. I'm also not a big fan of dark chocolate, and the frosting, if I can call it that. The topping is just melted dark chocolate. So I'm curious as to how this is going to taste. I have no idea. I'm going to be honest, it's not my favorite. It's quite mild in flavor. Like, I could imagine a jam compote with this and it would be really tasty. It kind of reminds me of angel food cake or pancake. It actually tastes like a lot like a pancake. It's good. I mean, it's really airy and fluffy. The cake wasn't hard to make either. It's just a lot of mixing. I used my stand mixer. I know, I'm supposed to be cozy and cottagecore, but you know what? We have the hand mixers for a reason, and I don't use them all the time, but when I have to mix things for a really long time, or in this circumstance where I had to bake a cake during my lunch period, I wanted to kind of make sure I'm getting everything done in time. So I used my stand mixer, which was really helpful because I was able to mix the eggs until I got really light and fluffy. And then I used my hand blender to mix up my egg whites, which was really helpful as well. So this is why it's so fluffy and airy and so pretty. And then I just melted the chocolate and it was done. Like, it's super easy cake. If you're more of like not a sweet cake eater but like the texture of cake, this would be really nice for you. Or if you like pancakes but want like a pancake type of cake, this would be really nice for you. So in all, I think it's actually quite delicious. I just think for me it's a little mild. Yeah, the flavor of just like the cake itself is quite mild. I think if I had I think I can make a berry compote and it would be absolutely perfect. I think that's what I'm going to end up doing, is making a berry compote. Other than that, it's actually quite tasty. But we're here for a book. Well, some of us are here for cake. I'm for both. But let's go ahead and talk about the book. I'm going to take the cake inside because I don't want the ants to get to it. I just noticed that there's some sugar ants out here. And I don't need a sugar ant issue. So I'm going to take the cake inside. And then we're going to dive into this book. Okay, we're back. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about the cake. The cake actually is supposed to be made in like a dome form, but I don't have a dome form. And so I went with just my regular springform pan, and it worked out quite nice. I didn't have an issue with baking the middle, and I didn't want to have to go find a new baking form. So springform pan worked perfectly. I was happy with that, and I think the cake still turned out nice. So definitely something really tasty. I was just thinking about it, and it might be really good to press like some citrus from a lemon into the sugar first, and then have a really nice lemon flavor come through. But then I don't think it would really work with the chocolate over top. Maybe orange. Ooh, that might be really good. Like an orange zest with the sugar. So then you have like an orangey chocolate cake. I might try that next time. I'm going to put a little sticky note in my book so I remember. So let's get to this book though. Thomas Hardy, Under the Greenwood Tree. So this is a classic author. He's written quite a few books. I don't know any of them because I haven't read any other book from him, but this is one of his shorter novels. And as I mentioned, I kind of picked this book up on random, and I'm kind of happy I did. It's a different classic than what I normally hear. You normally get like Jane Austen, Bronte sisters, and so on. But I haven't heard of Thomas Hardy before, which I'm kind of disappointed in myself. I've now realized that he's actually a really popular and well-known Victorian writer. But hey, we all find authors in our own time. So I picked up this one in a little tiny bookstore. I picked it up because of the cover. I thought the cover was really pretty. And I had no idea what this book was going to be about. And I am pleasantly surprised that it's a love story. I normally don't read a lot of love stories. I'm not a big romance reader, but I do find Victorian literature romance very, very funny and intriguing, and this one did not disappoint me. I did find the beginning and the end kind of but the middle was really, really grand. I thought it was really well done. I love the way Thomas Hardy does his descriptions and his setting up the story. I read two of his quotes in the montage of the baking scene, and I thought those were so well done. You get a very nice, beautiful picture of how this foresty area looks, and he does such a great job kind of not necessarily putting you in the area, but kind of just creating this feeling and this. He has a way with words that creates a feeling of being in the woods. So not an image of being in the woods, but like that feeling of being in the woods, which I really thought was cool. And I really liked the way he had the interactions between the characters. I really was interested in like how Dick and Fancy were going to get along, and also how Fancy was going to interact with all the other characters. But I'm getting too far ahead. You need to know the beginning and just the general plot and ideas of the story. And this is the non-spoiler section, so that's also very important. So we follow one woman. Her name is Fancy Day, and Fancy Day is a school teacher. So she went and got an education. Her father sent her off to school to get an education. So when she comes back, she's actually kind of like, one, she's gorgeous, at least that's what she's described as, and she has an education, meaning she's actually worth more, meaning that her father wants to make sure she marries well so that way she has a well-off life. And so we have a bunch of men noticing her, we have a bunch of interactions happening in the town, and we have a couple subplots as well. So we have kind of the subplot of what's happening in the church. I won't go too much into that also during my spoiler section, but we have kind of a subplot what's happening in the church. We have subplots of between, not subplots, but we have conversations of class, and we also have kind of conversations of love. And so I found it quite intriguing and different from some of the other books I've read from the Victorian era, especially Emma. I was thinking a lot of Emma when I was reading this book, and I personally like the character development and the character interactions more in this novel than I did in Emma. I felt like it was more realistic, especially comparing to our life now and our romance now. It was actually kind of intriguing to see how you could compare those two ideas. But we end up following Fancy Day in her pursuit of pursuits. So it's not really her pursuing anybody, it's mostly men pursuing her. I mean, we're in the 1870s, so we still have the Victorian era kind of mindset where men are pursuing the women. You get married after 3 months. And so we have a couple men who are interested in her, and she is trying to figure out what she wants. We don't get a lot of perspective or kind of opinion from her side, but I'm kind of not surprised based on the novel itself. But that's pretty much what this novel's about. It's about a woman in a love square, but it's not really a love square. It's more of like a love pyramid because the men aren't interested in each other. It's just the men are interested in her. And so you have three men interested in Fancy Day, and Fancy Day now has to kind of figure out what she wants in life. You have one man who is from a lower class life, who's a farmstead. You have one man who is a vicar, so middle class, and you have another man who is upper class in the situation. So it is quite interesting. Like I had mentioned, we follow the classes, we follow the interactions between the classes. In the town, you don't really see that all that much, but when we're kind of looking at Fancy Day and her relationships and how she's going to choose, and also her father's kind of opinion on who she should choose, we kind of get a lot of interactions here. In all, I really loved kind of the banter that was happening back and forth. I thought it was actually really intriguing. I thought it was really funny. I like I mentioned, it is weirdly connectable. Connectable? Can I say that? It is weirdly alike to a lot of, I think, romance that's happening now. We just kind of make it a bit more, for lack of a better way of saying it, more dirty. And back then they were very, very not dirty. They were very proper. And so it just was very intriguing, very funny. I caught myself laughing at certain points, especially I was laughing not at the way they were talking to each other, but the fact that certain interactions were so shocking and just so weird, and also just almost like if a guy were to hit on you now or a girl were to hit on you now, you would also just be like shocked in a certain way and be like, what? And that's kind of how I felt in this book, but fancy and proper way of flirting. So I really enjoyed this in the sense of I probably would read it again. I don't think I would recommend it to everybody. If you liked Emma, I might actually recommend this to you. I did find the first couple chapters quite slow. I think for the first 30%, I was like, okay, what in the world was happening? I felt like there was a lot moving, and I couldn't figure out if I just wasn't getting the story or if I wasn't getting the writing style. The writing style is very old English, so there was times where I was just confused as to what I read. And the last two chapters I wasn't the biggest fan of, but like there's like 65% in the middle that I actually really enjoyed. I was actually really invested in the story. I really liked, like I said, the interactions, the conversations. It's a lot of dialogue, so it's dialogue heavy of what's happening. We don't get a lot of opinion about what characters are thinking other than Dick Dewey. Dick Dewey is one character that we get a lot of kind of like self-awareness from him, and so I did find that also intriguing and interesting. So all in all, it's an okay book. If you're looking for more of like a Victorian novel to read, and if you're wanting to read Thomas Hardy, this one might be a good starter in the sense that it's just quite short. I have a lot of little tabs in here I'm looking forward to talking about. If you find male jealousy funny, this might also be interesting for you because we have 3 men going after 1 woman. You're going to get male jealousy. So, if you liked Emma, I think you would like this, and that's all I'm going to say about it. I don't really have much more to say because it is a Victorian novel that's a little bit shorter, so I think the plot of itself is not very in depth. There is, of course, like I had mentioned, discussion of the church and class and love, but I don't see a need to go into those topics. You'll know when you go into the book about those topics. I'm also not going to be discussing too much of those things also in my spoiler section. It's just I thought I would let you know it's going to be brought up. So that's my unspoiler section. And now for the spoiler section. So if you don't want to listen to spoilers, go ahead and jump to the end so you know which book we're going to be reading next and which bake we're going to be baking next. And if you don't want to be part of the spoilers, go ahead and click to that section in 3, 2, 1. This is spoilers. So, Dick Dewey is unbearable. I felt like he was such a jealous butthole sometimes that I couldn't stand him at points. So, yeah, I just jumped right in because I really wanted to discuss Dick Dewey. But let's go ahead and roll back a little bit. So we have Fancy Day. Fancy Day is educated, she's beautiful, and her father, Jeffrey, I think his name is Jeffrey, wants her to marry well because he also came from a poorer family, and he married his wife at the time. I believe his wife died because Fancy ends up having a stepmother, and Fancy ends up getting sent off to school and to live with her aunt and get educated. So I think I missed something there. I must have. But the idea is that Fancy has finished her education and now she's coming back to her hometown to be the school teacher. So she's now teaching this, she's a school teacher. She also plays the organ. And so there's some discussion of what's happening with the music at the church. That's what I was discussing earlier. I'm not going to go too much into the church. But so the vicar decides that they're going to have Fancy Day play the organ at the church, and the choir is no longer going to be singing. Well, that ends up being a little kerfuffle. People aren't happy. Mostly the choir's not happy because it's not just the choir, but they also play instruments, and they're known for going around and playing the music. Like, we walk into the first chapter and they're practicing music. That's where I got really confused, is the first 20-30 pages is about like what's happening with music and the changes that are happening, and I was so lost. So if you're lost at the beginning of this video or the beginning of this spoiler section, that's how I felt in the beginning of this book. So we have fancy day, she comes back and she's now the school teacher. She's now going to be playing the organ for the church, and she's not done it, but the vicar has kind of pushed out the people who are going to be, who normally would play the music. And there's a little like unhappiness, unease, but things move forward. And then we're kind of going through the seasons. So this was winter, and winter, she comes back, she's teaching school. We then have spring, and then we get some flirtations happening, some birds and the bees situation, and we end up getting fancy day and some interaction with the vicar, I believe. I believe that's happened in spring, but we also get fancy day and interaction with Dick Dewey. So in all, there's just a lot of jealousy and a lot of movement and a lot of like question of who Fancy Day is going to pick. I don't think we got enough of Fancy Day's opinion to be able to actually really understand what she wanted. We just kind of got her crying and then not knowing what she wanted to do, and then a decision was made, and then a decision was not made, and a decision was made, and then yeah. So I made a couple marks because the biggest topic I want to talk about is actually Dick Dewey, like I had mentioned. And Dick Dewey has a very strong opinion about women. And he has a strong opinion about what women should be doing and should not be doing. And the first scene where I actually caught myself laughing was when Dick Dewey picks up Fancy Day from town and takes her in his wagon back to their little village they live in. And so Dick Dewey picks up Fancy Day, and they're in the wagon, and they're wagoning back to their town, and there's this slower wagon in front of them. I believe it passed them, I'm not sure, but there's a slower wagon in front of them. But Dick Dewey is kind of being sassy, and he's like, oh, you're dressed pretty because you want other people's attention. Oh, you're doing this because you want attention. Oh, you only care about yourself. And there's like a lot of this conversation. And then Dick Dewey's like, do you love me? Do you love me? And I was like, wow, this is like a classic situation that we would see today, where men or women sometimes are like, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And they pressure the person so much that I think it ends up causing this like weird situation, right? And so that's how I was feeling in this situation. And Fancy Day says, oh yeah, I might love you. And in his joyous happiness of, yeah, I won some of her attention, he decides he's going to pass the wagon in front of him, the older wagon, with his wagon. So his horse is going to pass the other wagon. And it's just like one of those moments where I was thinking about how like some men like drive their cars really fast, and some women drive their cars really fast to pass another car to like show off. And I personally am not one who likes that. I don't like when people like drive really fast past other cars. I think it doesn't make sense. You don't get anywhere any faster. But some people do this to show off, and I felt like they were doing that in a wagon with a horse. And I thought it was so funny because I could picture this in my head of this guy trying to make his horse go really fast past another wagon, and then he ends up getting passed by another man who is interested in Fancy Day, whose name is Shriner, I believe. So Shriner is our above means our handsome, wealthy man. So Fancy Day is also being courted by this man. So she's being courted by the vicar, who is having her play the organ at the church. She's being courted by Dick Dewey, who is our poor man who works on a farm, and courted by Shriner, who is, I believe his name is Shriner. I believe his name is Shinner or Shiner. Shinner. I'm going to say Shinner. So we have Shinner, who has now passed his wagon, past Dewey's wagon, or Dick Dewey's wagon. So it's just a man thing going on, and it's just kind of embarrassing. And we also then have the vicar also kind of announce like love situation in a church sermon at one point. So everybody's just going crazy in the sense of being obsessed with this woman, and she's considered smart. Like, she's considered smart and beautiful, like I mentioned, but there's not much we as the reader get to know about her other than this, because we're kind of getting the man's perspective of her at all times. And at one point she finally admits that she loves Dick Dewey, and then she's like, oh, I'll marry you, Dick Dewey, because Dick Dewey like was like, you should marry me. And then there's like other interactions with other people, but then at one point Jeffrey Fancy Day's father says, no, you can't marry her because you're not worth enough. And so Dick Dewey then becomes sad and like, nah, and doesn't interact with Fancy Day anymore, which I have to admit is a big difference from nowadays. I mean, in some cultures, you still have to ask the father for the hand in marriage, and it's interesting how much some of these things have changed, of course, but the interactions and how people interact with each other is still quite a bit the same. I did like the scene where Dick Dewey and Jeffrey Day, Fancy Day's dad, were in the garden, and so Jeffrey, this was a whole scene. Now I have to back up a little bit, sorry. So we have Fancy Day saying, yes, I'll marry you, Dick Dewey. And then they decide that Dick Dewey is going to go ahead and ask Fancy Day's dad if he can have her hand in marriage. So they plan that they're going to go to Fancy Day's house on a Saturday. Fancy Day is going to be there, I think, earlier the day before, and then Dick Dewey would come a little bit later and then ask Jeffrey Day if he can have his daughter's hand in marriage. And that was a whole situation as well. I marked this situation because I thought it was absolutely ridiculous and also funny, because Fancy Day wants to fix her dress before she goes to her home to visit her family, and Dick Dewey gets so frustrated with her because he's like, oh, let's go nutting, which, come on. So Dick Dewey wants to go nutting and invites Miss Day with him to go nutting, and she's like, oh, I want to go fix my dress first. So she's like, it's only going to take me like 15 minutes, just wait for me. So we wait 15 minutes, and then we wait 30 minutes, and we are getting kind of like Dick Dewey's kind of perspective of what's happening, and he is getting a little impatient. He talks to her at first, and then he can't talk to her anymore because there's no more conversation, so he goes and looks at the knots in the wood and counts all the knots in the wood and the tables, and then he goes and does something else, and then he counts all the flies on the ceiling, and then he goes and does something else, and then at one point he gets so frustrated with Fancy Day that he's like, I'm gonna go wait outside, and so he has a little hissy fit, and I found that so funny and just so entertaining. It was these little sections what kept me like intrigued and interested in the story. I felt that Dick Dewey's like frustration and irritation with Fancy Day was terrible in the sense that he was such a little weenie, and also just like he couldn't just be an adult about it at times. But then I was thinking to myself, maybe that's what happened back in Victorian ages, and then I thought, that's what happens now. Like, I'm trying to, for example, I sometimes make us really late to leave, me and my partner, because I want to do something or I'm distracted, and I'm like, oh, just give me 2 minutes, and it takes 6 minutes. This is not just a lady thing, this is also a man thing. Like, everybody does this, but this was so over exaggerated that it was just so entertaining. I'm off topic, but this was the entertaining part. So they make a plan to go see Fancy Day's dad. Don't worry, the dress thing ended up not being a big deal. They still love each other. They move on. So, Fancy Day's already there, and Dick Dewey shows up, but he's in the woods, and he's looking towards the house where Fancy Day lives, and he sees that Shiner is there. And Shiner is trying to get Fancy Day's hand in marriage as well. And we have Jeffrey, Fancy Day's dad, trying to get Fancy Day to say yes to Shiner because Shiner is wealthy and has stuff. He's a really big wasp. Okay, so we have Dick Dewey seeing that Shiner is there, and he ends up getting a little jealous again. And he's like storming in the woods and kind of having like a little breakdown. He's making a plan of what he's going to do. So he makes a plan, but we get like a jump into what's going on with Fancy Day and her family. And they've cleared out some bees out of some hives because they're collecting honey. They're honey collectors. I'm going to say I didn't like that part. I kind of really disliked that part. I'm a big bee fan. I got bees on my wrist. I have a bee house behind me. I'm a big bee lover. And when I read that part about the bees, it just kind of bummed me out, but move on. It was a different time. So we have Fancy Day helping collect the honey from the hives for her family so they can sell the honey. And the dad ends up getting stung a lot, and so he has to go inside, and the mom goes inside as well. And so it's just Shiner and Fancy Day. And they go into a little hut to start collecting the honey. And then we have Dick Dewey like barge in, and there's this like man rivalry. I'm having a hard time with that word. Man showdown. We have a man showdown between Shiner and Dick Dewey, and they're kind of like challenging each other for Fancy Day's attention, and Fancy Day is trying to show Dick Dewey a little bit of attention because she's already said yes to his hand in marriage, and she gives him a little bit of honey. And then Shiner's like, oh, give me honey too. So now they're all three eating honey, but then Fancy Day gets stung on the lip, and one man says, oh, it's too dangerous. The other man says, oh, it's fine. And the other man says, oh, you should do this for medication. And the other man says, you should do this for medication. So there's like a man off, or opinion off, I don't know. And so they have this like interaction, and they end up like charging into the house to go get Fancy Day's medicine to put on her lips so it doesn't swell, and they like charge up to Miss Day, so Fancy Day's mom, and was like, oh, we need this medicine, and then she's like, don't eat my face. It's just so like old school interactions. It's hilarious to read. And so these are the parts where I really enjoyed it. And in the end, Jeffrey decides that he needs to ask the dad for her hand in marriage before anybody else can. So he says, I will meet you in the garden. And the dad says, I need to go get my hat first. And Dick Dewey says, great, I'll meet you in the garden. Because the garden is where hard discussions happen. Not, discussions that you want everybody else to hear. So you go up to the garden to have these hard discussions. And I found that so delightful because it was explained in the book, and I was like, oh, that's so cute. It's like a nice way to express or explain something to your audience without like over explaining it. It was just really funny. And then Jeffrey, of course, Mr. Day, just says no, and it ends up being a whole thing. And then we have Fancy Day not feigning sadness, but she ends up going to the witch, and she asks the witch, what can I do to make my dad say I can marry him? Give me a spell. And the witch says, you don't need a spell, you just need to pretty much starve yourself with sadness. So she ends up stopping, she doesn't eat anymore, so that way her dad sees that she's so sad that she can't consume food anymore. So she's doing, what is it called? A starving... A starving strike, a food strike? I think it's called a food strike. So she ends up doing a food strike before it's time. And so then her dad's like, oh, my darling Fancy, you should eat and I'll give you permission to marry your Dick Dewey. And she's like, you cannot just like, I don't want you to do it just because of me starving and being sad. And he's like, no, of course, you should just marry him because you love him. And so that's a edict. Meaning it's finished. So we have Fancy Day and Dick Dewey now proposed to be married, but they're going to get married later on in spring. And during that time, another man steps in, our vicar. So our vicar like approaches her and is like, my lady, my Fancy Day, will you marry me? I'll give you everything, blah, blah, blah. And she says yes. She says, yes, I'll marry you. And then I'm like, wait, what? What is happening? So our vicar leaves in happiness and is joyful and excited, and he goes to his home and he ends up starting to write a letter to her to get to her the next day. And the next day when he goes to mail off the letter, walk the letter to her, No, to the post box. I'm not really sure where he's walking the letter to. We have him receiving a letter from her. And the letter is pretty much saying, hey, sorry, I love Dick Dewey. I'm already proposed to be married to him. I'm sorry that this happened. And the vicar is, of course, bummed and sad, but he says, okay. So he gives up pretty quickly. So we have Shiner that's out, or Shinner. I don't know how to pronounce his name. The vicar out, and now it's Fancy Day and Dick Dewey. And the vicar says, you need to tell Dick Dewey that you said yes to me, so there's no secrets. Guess what Fancy Day didn't do? And that's the very last sentence. It literally says, oh, 'tis the nightingale, murmured she, and thought of a secret she would never tell. How? Like, what? So I like this book. I thought it was really funny in the middle. Like I mentioned, the first like 30% was pretty slow. It was kind of like, I questioned putting it down, but then I was like, oh, I'm doing this for a video. I need to keep going. And so I'm happy I did keep going. The first 30 pages were really confusing. I felt like there was a lot going on. It felt really jumbled together. The Old English also kind of confused me. And then the 65% in the middle were like top notch. I found it funny. I found the interactions really well done. I found it realistic even to nowadays. And it's so interesting to like see that personalities or motivations or how we do something hasn't really changed over the time. Like how we do it necessarily has changed, like what words we use, but it's still always the same motivations. We're all looking for love, and sometimes there's multiple people in love with one person, and then one person has to decide. So it's just really entertaining to kind of see the evolution of love has not changed at all. Like I mentioned in my non-spoiler section, I would recommend this if you liked Emma. I think it has kind of the same humor and the same like same quirkiness. But I do know it's not for everybody. If you're not a big classics reader, I would not pick this one up. But I found it fun, and I really liked the middle part. And I think I would pick up another Thomas Hardy book. I've watched another YouTuber, I'll put their name below, who had mentioned that she read all the Thomas Hardy books, so I'd be really curious as to which one she thought was like the best one, and maybe read that one, and that might be a really good kind of like introduction into Thomas Hardy without being like accidentally stumbling upon his books. So really great Victorian novel in the sense of the weirdness, quirkiness. I do think I really liked the play on class and like looking at how class did affect relationships. I think they still affect relationships now, and I really just liked the balance of this like weirdness with men. And there's a movie, and I'm so excited to watch the movie. So I'm gonna watch the movie I think tonight or tomorrow, and maybe I'll put my feelings on the movie in the comments below. But now it is time to pick our next book and our next bake. And I forgot all my bakes and books in in the apartment. So let me go grab those, and then we can pick our next bake and book. Okay. We have our books and the baking books on the bottom. So let's go ahead and do the baking book first, because I always find that really entertaining. So let's go ahead and see what we're baking. Do we want to go more in the back, more in the front, more in the middle? I feel like right here. Ooh, that looks really tasty. Oh, raspberries. This is a raspberry tart with poppy seed pastry. And it's also like perfect season for it too. I do have to make sure I like bake this in advance though, because like today's bake was easy to do in one day, but this one would not be easy to do in one day. I feel like I'm gonna need a little bit more time. But I'm gonna read the little note she has on the left side, because I find that really interesting. So she says, everything about this tart is just beautiful. The color of the raspberries, the speckles of the poppy seed, the tanginess of the filling. Every time I make it for my customers, it sells out in matters of minutes, and when I have friends over for dinner, it makes people smile with joy. You replace the raspberries with blueberries or even blackberries for a rustic chic look and a fabulous aroma garnished with some edible lavender sprigs. Oh, I'm so excited to bake this one. I think this one's going to be really, really delightful. Oh. And for our book, I didn't try pronouncing the bake in Italian this time because I'm just really bad at speaking Italian. I'm gonna have to talk to some friends so they can teach me more Italian. So we have all of our books here. I'm so surprised with actually how fast we're going through them. This year's going by so fast. So I kind of want to go with one of these 3 right here. They're like a little bit thinner. And I'm reading Butter right now, and Butter is quite thick, so I want to make sure I have time to read this book without feeling stressed. And I kind of want to go with this top one. So let's go ahead and do this one. It's soft cover. It's kind of like a minty green. I did terrible. Okay, ready? Let's see. Ooh, knitting. I've had this book for so long and I have not read it. So Knitting by Anne Bartlett. This book is, in Anne Bartlett's engaging novel, a chance meeting sparks a friendship between 2 very different women who share a fascination with knitting. Sandra, a rigid academic, struggles to navigate the world without her husband, whom she has recently lost to cancer. Martha, a self-taught textile artist with her own secret store of grief. Oh, that's an interesting way to kind of mention grief. Spencer Day's knitting elaborate projects charged with personal meaning. As the 2 women collaborate on a new project, surprising events will help heal them both. I think this is a really good time to read this book. I love I learned this new term yesterday from Gavin's video, healing books, I guess. But I think this will be just a really nice, warm, heartfelt book. And books about friendship and love in that way are just always pulling at my heartstrings. So I'm looking forward to this one. I think this one will be really nice. And I think, thankfully, it's not too long. Actually, the text is quite large, so I don't think this is going to take me very long to read at all. And thankfully, it's not Victorian literature, so I won't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it's trying to say to me. So I'm really looking forward to this one. So we're going to be doing a raspberry tart with poppy seed crust, and then we're reading the book Knitting by Anne Bartlett. If you want to go ahead and make one of these with me, like a tart, or read this book, make sure you go ahead and comment below. I think it's always lovely to have buddy reads, and I'm always looking for new buddy reads or book club situations. So if you want to read with me, go ahead and comment below, or you can find me on Instagram at Melissa's Cozy Corner, or the books in Melissa's Cozy Corner. Either one, you can find both those channels down below. But I'm really excited for this. So we have a raspberry tart, like I mentioned, this book, and this is what we're going to be doing in May. Oh my goodness, May already. So this is our May stuff. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss next month's video. I'll post it on the 1st of June, and we'll go ahead and talk about these 2 things. And if you liked this video, go ahead and give it a like. I would really appreciate it. It really does help me out, and it helps me kind of figure out what you guys are interested in watching, and I would just really appreciate it. The more I grow, the more people we can kind of bring into this little cozy corner and have a really nice positive section. So I will let you guys go there. I really appreciate everything you guys bring and the joy you bring to my life. And until next week, or I don't know, next week, 2 weeks? I don't know when my next video is going to go. Until my next video, I hope you have a fantastic day, a lovely weekend, and I'll see you guys soon. Ciao!